Thank you. I'd like to give you an insight into what GTZ does and how we complement work that's being done at the grassroots level, work we just learned and heard of from Fatih. Combining field experience, research and policy advice to empower women. And I'd like to give you a few examples of the work we have done. Of course, I can't cover it all, but here is an example of looking at Islamic law and customary law. So we start off with basically the analysis, and we worked on this topic over time, and then we looked at what does a legal provision have to do with the reality of day-to-day life of the women. And we took the next step and then looked into how can we influence that? How can we improve? How can we ensure that laws, statutory laws, are implemented and women do receive their rights? So one example here in Egypt, we supported local activists and the local organization to ensure that personal identity cards and documents were issued, because they offered and enforced the legal rights of women and gave them access or provided them with rights in case of divorce or inheritance, or passing on property to their children. Now, with the lesson learned how important, for example, documents are, legal identity documents, apart from, for example, land, we transferred this knowledge and looked into how to apply it in other contexts. And we did that, for example, in Indonesia after the tsunami, when women were largely left behind because they couldn't prove, they couldn't make their claims due to the lack of personal identity cards. And so here we supported the development of a law on population administration, addressing, amongst others, value and effects of personal identity documents, legal consequences of unregistered marriages, unregistered children, and adoption cases, or going further into inheritance. Unregistered children find it hard to claim their rights later on in case of school fees, for example, applying for scholarships. So if the mother doesn't have identity cards, how do they pass on, how do they ensure that their children do have? Again, transfer and application of knowledge is a big part that combines research work like done here at ODI with practical work in the field. Part of it we commission ourselves, part of it we draw from research work like this one here and take it into our work on the ground. And to share it amongst ourselves, we conduct a gender competition to bring the experience from the field, from our colleagues, back to the headquarters, so then again we can share it out by our own networks. Again, we learned a lot about you need to know your rights, and often you don't do. A lot of us invest in research, and here we supported an initiative done in collaboration with the World Bank and IFC, and it's a gender law library. They gathered information from national legal provisions impacting women's economic status from 183 countries. And it's online, and you will find when you go onto it, you will find entries on, for example, property rights for 300 entries, or 85 entries on inheritance. So the knowledge about where to start with the policy intervention is very important to then know what to focus on in your bilateral program or supporting local organizations on the ground. Utilizing, and what I associate with it is strongly that utilizing our, and in this case it's not GTZ, but it's a German membership in multilateral organizations like the International Finance Organizations to promote women's empowerment. And we need to use this membership wisely. So here we supported it financially. We as well supported that, or got together in the context of a global donor committee on enterprise development. Germany is a member in various, GTZ, as well as KfW, as well as the BMZ. On the British side, DFID is a member, for example. It brings together donors working in the field of enterprise development, and they come up jointly to say what are the best approaches and strategies to promote, for example, in this case, a more effective donor practices for enterprise development. And when we looked at this was a conference, an annual meeting done and organized in 2007. When I looked at the program, I found there was no mention to gender issues or women's economic empowerment. So what we did, with the consent of the donor committee, organized a one-day preparatory conference, and we looked at all the issues that were addressed in the main conference from a gender perspective and say, how do we get these concerns into the main document and the handbook and guidance that was meant to be developed out of the conference as a work stream of the donor committee. And you can see, that's why I just copied the entire content, land issues and property rights were among the issues being addressed in the conference. And we went down to say, generally, what's the provisions, what are the figures and facts. We learned that only 1 to 2% of the individual title deeds are held by women, but then we went down to the national level and looked at actual practices. What does it mean? And here, for example, we look at facts and figures from Kenya, and we see that access to land, only very few women have access to land. Yet a lot of them are agricultural workers. So there's a big disbalance, a mismatch. This intervention we took in 2007 led to the establishment of a women's enterprise development network. So today it's not only part of the guidelines, but the donor community actually has established a work stream working on women's empowerment and taking all the concerns, starting from individual documents to land and ownership rights, into account, and say, what does it have to do if we want to empower women? Where is the role of bilateral and multilateral donors to support? And finally, empowering women is an ongoing task. It requires gathering and sharing of knowledge and experience and translating the latter into concrete action. If we get stuck with the research, we haven't done the change, we haven't facilitated change, but we have contributed large towards it. So we need to take this knowledge and channel it into the implementation, onto the implementation side. We do that, for example, looking at steps for action. That it's a manual for our own colleagues in the field. We share our knowledge in a large network of donors in the Train for Deaf network, where we organize joint learning events on the ground in the country, comprising of a third government officials from the country, a third donor representatives, a third other stakeholders. This could be NGOs, this could be private sector. And here we liaise very closely with ODI. ODI is developing the materials and implementing the training on the ground. The last one here is our work as we feed it in, as generate our and compile our knowledge and experience into, for example, a good practice note in the context of OECD DAC members there. Well, again, the floor is there to share experience and knowledge, make it known to others, and draw on best practices as they are there. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.